Welcome to the Wellness Lab Digest, where we help you to absorb powerful, life-changing insights from top wellness experts with our daily, bite-sized wellness podcast summaries. Each episode is packed with distilled, powerful takeaways to boost your health and well-being. To support this podcast, please scroll down on whatever app you're listening on. Ratings and reviews are helpful. Even better, just send the show to a friend. Or check out our sponsors at the bottom of the page, or simply click the Support the Show link.
All right, let's dive into all this stuff you sent us about how to optimize your health through diet. We've got articles, research, all sorts of things about artificial sweeteners and organ meats.
Oh, yeah.
And
fascinating stuff.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. You're clearly interested in how what you eat can really make a difference in how healthy you are.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit on two topics that people are really starting to rethink in terms of nutrition. And it seems like everybody's interested in what a really healthy diet looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that really jumped out at me was this whole idea about eating specific organ meats can actually support the health of your corresponding organs.
Right.
Sounds a little out there, I have to admit, but
A little woo-woo, maybe.
a little woo-woo.
Yeah.
But the research you sent it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. We can definitely dig into that. But let's start with those artificial sweeteners. You shared a YouTube video with us. It was called Eat These Foods to Optimize Your Health Today, where Dr. Paul Saladino says that they might be even worse for you than sugar.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, most people, I think, view artificial sweeteners as this sort of guilt-free way to satisfy your sweet tooth.
Right.
So why does he think that they're so bad?
Well, he says they trick your body, they taste sweet, but there are no calories, so your metabolism gets all mixed up. And this can lead to insulin resistance or even weight gain, which is the opposite of what most people are hoping for.
Yeah, so it's like you're telling your body a sweet little lie and it doesn't like it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your body wants the real deal.
Okay.
One of the studies that you sent, it was published by the American Diabetes Society, found that sucralose actually increases blood sugar levels by 14% and insulin levels by 20% in people who don't usually use artificial sweeteners.
Wow. Those numbers are pretty alarming.
Yeah.
But are there any researchers who disagree with Dr. Saladino's take on artificial sweeteners?
Yeah, there are.
Are there any studies that contradict his findings?
There are differing opinions, for sure.
Yeah.
Some studies have shown that artificial sweeteners can actually be a helpful tool for managing weight when they're used in moderation.
Okay.
But there is growing concern about their long-term effects on your metabolic health, and especially on the gut microbiome, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It seems like maybe more research is needed to really understand the long-term implications of that.
Yeah.
But for now, definitely something to be mindful of.
Absolutely.
So if artificial sweeteners are off the table, what does Dr. Saladino recommend instead? What should we be using to satisfy that sweet tooth?
He suggests sticking to natural sweeteners, things like raw honey and fruit in moderation.
Okay.
He believes that those types of sweeteners are more in line with what our bodies evolved to handle.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like our bodies would be better equipped to deal with foods that our ancestors have been eating for thousands of years.
Right.
Speaking of ancestral diets, let's tackle those organ meats.
Right.
Not exactly the most popular topic, I have to admit.
Not really a dinner party favorite.
Not really, no. But the research you sent it's pretty compelling.
Right.
So help me out here. Where do we even begin?
Well, it might sound a little weird at first, but there's a growing amount of research showing that when you eat organ meats, it can actually support the health of the same organs in your body. So, for example, if you eat liver, it might actually benefit your liver, heart for your heart, and so on.
So it's kind of like that old saying, you are what you eat, taken to a whole new level.
Right. Exactly.
But is there actual science behind that? Or is this just hype?
There's definitely science to support it. Organ meats have unique nutrients and compounds that you don't find in muscle meat. For example, liver. Liver is like a nutritional gold mine. It's full of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, all sorts of good stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about some of the more, I don't know, exotic organs, like brain or kidney? Are those considered safe to eat? And are there any risks associated with eating a lot of organ meats?
That's a great question. While organ meats are really nutrient dense, it's important to watch your portion sizes.
Yeah.
Some organs, like liver, for example, have a lot of vitamin A. And too much of that can actually be harmful.
Oh, wow.
It's always a good idea to talk to your doctor or a healthcare professional before you make any major changes to your diet.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially when it comes to something like organ meats.
For sure.
So it's all about, balance and moderation.
Exactly. You don't want to overdo it. Dr. Saladino gives a really fascinating example in this stuff that you sent. There's research showing that thymogylin, which is a peptide found in thymus, can boost your immune function and actually reduce respiratory infections.
Wow.
And this applies to both kids and older folks.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like a natural immune booster hiding in plain sight.
But are there any studies showing like negative effects from eating thymus?
Well, while thymogylin has shown promising results, there are a couple of things to think about.
Yep.
Some people might have sensitivities or allergies to certain organ meats.
Right?
And as I said before, you got to do things in moderation. Too much of certain organs can throw things out of whack.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see why this whole topic is so, controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to consider. It's not just as simple as, piling your plate with organ meats and calling it a day.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, the potential benefits they're pretty hard to ignore.
They are really fascinating. It's important to come to this topic with an open mind and do your research. And of course, like I said before, talking to a healthcare professional is always a smart move.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got the potential downsides of artificial sweeteners on the one hand, and the potential benefits of organ meats on the other. Two very different sides of the nutrition coin.
Right.
What do you think ties those two things together?
I think they both force us to rethink what we believe about healthy eating. They challenge conventional wisdom and encourage us to look beyond what everyone else is saying.
Yeah, I like that. It's about taking control of your own health,
Absolutely.
doing your own research, and figuring out what really works for you. We're going to explore these topics even further when we come back, but for now, take a moment to digest everything we've covered so far. Welcome back. Before we went to, well, not a break, I guess, we were talking about artificial sweeteners and organ meats. Two things that are really shaking things up when we think about nutrition.
Definitely. They are.
But there's another piece to this puzzle we got to talk about. The gut microbiome.
Yes, absolutely. You sent us some really fascinating research about the gut microbiome, and it seems like you're really interested in how those trillions of bacteria that live in our gut affect our health.
Totally. I've heard it described as this hidden organ that plays a role in everything from how well we digest food to our immunity.
It does. It
Yeah.
really does.
But how does it all connect to these things we've been talking about, like artificial sweeteners and organ meats?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Both artificial sweeteners and organ meats can actually change the balance of bacteria in your gut.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to picture this. We've got artificial sweeteners, which Dr. Saladino says mess with our metabolism. Then we've got organ meats, which he says are packed with nutrients.
Right?
And now we're throwing gut bacteria into the mix. How does it all fit together?
Okay, think of your gut like a delicate ecosystem, okay?
Nope. Okay.
With different types of bacteria that all work together to keep you healthy. Artificial sweeteners, even though they might seem harmless because they don't have any calories, can mess up this balance. It's kind of like introducing an invasive species into like a pristine environment.
So instead of like nourishing the good bacteria, the artificial sweeteners are throwing things off.
Exactly. And this imbalance, sometimes it's called dysbiosis, can have effects all over your body. It's been linked to, all sorts of problems. Inflammation, a weaker immune system, even a higher risk of chronic diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes.
Wow. So those little packets of artificial sweetener that seem so harmless might be doing more harm than good. So it sounds like it's not just about how they affect us directly, but also how they affect this whole internal ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that our bodies are incredibly complex and everything is connected. And research shows that the gut microbiome is way more important than we used to think.
So where do organ meats fit into all of this? Do they help or hurt the gut microbiome?
That's where the research gets a little tricky. We're still learning about how organ meats directly affect the gut microbiome. But there are some good signs.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Remember those unique peptides and growth factors we talked about that are in organ meats? Well, some researchers think those might not just help keep our own organs healthy, but they might also affect the types and the jobs of our gut bacteria.
So it's like those nutrients are pulling double duty. They're helping our cells and our gut bacteria.
Exactly. Some people even think that these peptides might help control the immune system in the gut and keep inflammation down. And a healthy gut immune system is really important for preventing chronic diseases.
This makes me think about something else Dr. Saladino said. He compared humans to omnivores that eat mostly meat, like dogs. You mentioned he thinks we do best on a diet that puts animal-based foods first.
Right, he does. And he says that a lot of the typical dietary advice we hear is just wrong, and that it's often influenced more by what food companies want us to believe than good science. He even talked about the debate around the Cuff's food compass, which ranked frosted mini wheats as healthier than eggs.
Wait, seriously, frosted mini wheats over eggs? That's just crazy.
I know, right? Doesn't make sense. Dr. Saladino says that study focused way too much on things like cholesterol and saturated fat without really considering all the good nutrients in foods like eggs and meat.
So it's like they were judging a book by its cover, without even reading it. But how do we know what to believe when it comes to nutrition? There's so much information out there, and it all seems to contradict itself.
That's why it's so important to think critically. Don't just believe everything you hear. Look at the evidence. Think about where the information is coming from, and always ask questions. Dr. Saladino encourages people to try different things and see what works best for them. He acknowledges that everyone is different, and what works for one person might not work for another.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's more about finding what works best for you.
Exactly. He even said, if someone is doing well on a particular diet, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, or something else, they should stick with it. But he does worry about the potential downsides of a strictly plant-based diet, especially when it comes to things like fertility.
Interesting. I know veganism has become super popular these days. What specific concerns does he have?
He mentioned some studies about vegans and vegetarians in Loma Linda, California, that found potential problems with fertility, especially for men, things like sperm count and motility. He thinks this could be because they aren't getting enough of some nutrients from meat that are really important for reproductive health, like zinc.
That's pretty thought-provoking. It makes you wonder if there might be some unintended consequences of cutting out whole food groups. But this also makes me think about those blue zones, the places around the world where people tend to live much longer, healthier lives. I always thought those were mainly plant-based.
That's a common misconception. Dr. Saladino pointed out that 4 of the 5 recognized blue zones actually include a good amount of meat in their traditional diets. He specifically mentioned Sardinia, Ikaria, and Okinawa.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. So it's not just about eating tons of fruits and veggies. There's more to it than that.
Absolutely. It's about variety and balance, and not thinking of any food groups as the enemy. He pointed out a study that found no centenarians among the vegans or vegetarians in Okinawa. This suggests that eating a wider range of foods, including meat, could be a key to their long lives.
So those blue zone folks are onto something. It seems like there's so much we can learn from traditional cultures and how they eat. But how do we make that work with the way we live today? I mean, most of us don't have access to the same foods or lifestyle as our ancestors.
You're right. It's about adapting those basic ideas to our modern world. We might not be hunting and gathering, but we can still make whole, unprocessed foods a priority. We can cook at home more and pay attention to what we're putting in our bodies.
That makes sense. It's about making deliberate choices that support our health goals, even if we can't perfectly copy what our ancestors did.
Exactly. And that might mean being open to trying foods that have fallen out of fashion, like organ meats, or looking at different ways of thinking about nutrition, like approaches based on how humans evolved. It's about stepping back and asking, what did our ancestors eat, and how can we learn from what they knew?
This whole conversation is making me realize there's a ton of conflicting information about food and health. It's really hard to know what to believe.
That's so true. That's why it's crucial to think for yourself, to question what you hear, and to be open to talking about these things respectfully, even when people disagree. And when it comes to your own health, remember, you're in charge.
I like that. It's about taking charge of your own health journey and being an informed consumer.
Right?
Speaking of being informed, Dr. Saladino had some pretty strong opinions about how politics gets mixed up with food, especially when it comes to red meat.
Yeah, he did.
What did he have to say about that? Welcome back. We've covered a lot of ground here, exploring artificial sweeteners, organ meats, and that fascinating world of the gut microbiome.
Yeah, a real deep dive into some cutting-edge research and some thought-provoking ideas. You sent us some amazing stuff to work with.
I'm glad you think so. Before we wrap things up, though, let's zoom out a bit and think about what all this means for you, the listener. What are some key takeaways that you can actually use in your own life?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is what we talked about with those artificial sweeteners. Get rid of them. They might seem all sweet and innocent, but they can really mess with your metabolism and your gut health.
It's like breaking up with a bad friend.
Exactly. And don't forget, when you're looking at those food labels, artificial sweeteners can be disguised under a lot of different names.
Right.
So you got to be a label detective and make sure they're not sneaking into your food.
Okay, detective hat on. What about organ meats? I gotta say, I'm still not quite ready for like a liver and onions dinner, but I can't ignore all the potential benefits we talked about.
I hear you. Organ meats can be a little intimidating at first. You don't have to jump in all at once. Start small. Maybe try adding some liver to a ground meat dish or even blending it into a smoothie. And if that's still a bit too much, you can always find those desiccated organ supplements. They're basically just freeze-dried organs in a capsule.
Oh, okay, so baby steps are key.
Exactly. Find what works for you and what fits into your life.
And we can't forget about all those trillions of bacteria living in our gut, the gut microbiome. We talked about how important it is to keep them happy and in balance.
Right. It's like having a garden in your gut. You want to be sure it's got lots of different plants and that it's thriving. So make sure you're feeding those good bacteria lots of fiber from whole, unprocessed foods, like fruits, vegetables, and legumes.
So eat the rainbow, right? All those colorful fruits and veggies.
Exactly. And don't forget about fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, and sauerkraut. They're full of probiotics, which are live cultures of those good bacteria. They can help repopulate and diversify your gut microbiome.
Like giving your gut a boost of good vibes. So we've got ditch the artificial sweeteners, experiment with organ meats, and nourish your gut microbiome. Any other words of wisdom before we sign off?
Remember, when it comes to your health, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Be curious, question what you hear, and don't be afraid to try new things. See what works best for you.
It's all about taking charge and becoming your own health advocate. And remember, we're always here to help you make sense of this complicated world of nutrition. So if you decide to take the plunge and try some organ meats, or you have any other health adventures, let us know.
You'd love to hear all about it. Until next time, happy exploring.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.
Thank you for listening to the Wellness Lab Digest. If you receive value from the podcast, I have 3 asks of you. 1, share the show on social media with your friends and tag the show at the Wellness Lab Digest on Instagram. Number 2, please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, please let me know what topics you would like us to cover in the future. You can contact me at empoweringmen.org/contact. And right now we have a free ebook to get you started on your wellness journey as well. That's empoweringmen.org/contact. To support this podcast, check out our sponsors at the bottom of the page or simply click the Support the Show link.